Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Demas. I'm the executive editor here at Lincoln Square. And today I'm happy to welcome back Liz Oyer. Liz is a former public defender who served as the U.S. Pardon Attorney from 2022 until 2025. And she was actually fired by the Trump administration for protesting some of their policies. And now she is a legal analyst who is in high demand with everything that Trump has been doing. So thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks so much for having me back, Susan.
Well, we were talking about some of the crazy news, but of course, over the weekend, we had a pretty bizarre tweet from Donald Trump, which may have been a private message to his Attorney General Pam Bondi. We don't know, but regardless, his message was very clear, and he was ordering her to step up the prosecution of several of his political enemies who he, of course, has endearing nicknames for, like Congressman Adam Schiff, his former FBI director, James Comey, who he actually appointed, and then I'm sorry, who he fired, and New York Attorney General Tish James. And basically, this tweet in true Trump fashion with lots of all caps, but the message was clear. Get on this. I want these people prosecuted. What's the holdup? I think back to Watergate times when the press was digging up all of these scandals and trying to follow the money, but now it's like every day Donald Trump just puts out these tweets and statements of mass corruption, and it's overwhelming. But can you walk us through the legal situation here, because this really does seem unprecedented to me?
Yeah, what we're seeing now in the Justice Department is everything that Donald Trump has been doing since January coming together, coming to a head. So he has taken from day one a different approach to the Justice Department than any other president, and even then during his first administration, he has made it clear that he is running the show at DOJ. And that is unprecedented since Watergate. Since then, there's always been an intentional separation of the Justice Department and the president to ensure that the justice powers cannot be misused by the president. But Donald Trump, from day one, has said, I'm doing it differently. I'm going to run this place like it's my personal law firm. So he started to lay the groundwork for that by appointing people who were actually his personal attorneys to all of the highest positions throughout the Justice Department. That includes Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, Emil Bove, who was the number three official until recently, as well as numerous others, including the Solicitor General, for example, who represented Donald Trump personally in the Supreme Court, is now representing the United States in the Supreme Court. So he created this team of people who were all beholden to him. And then Pam Bondi messaged to the entire workforce, we are all the president's lawyers. That's,
You
they're.
actually got a memo while you were still there at DOJ,
Yes.
right?
Yep. She put it in writing, sent it out to the entire 115,000 person workforce of the Justice Department. We all work for Donald Trump, which is not the case. We serve the American people. We are entrusted with upholding the Constitution. But that's not how she saw it, and that's how she has chosen to run the department. Then, after sort of laying that groundwork, the administration started systematically firing all of the career experts who could or would stand in the way of the president installing his political agenda. So I was fired, but also people who were entrusted with upholding important institutional guardrails against corruption and politicization, were fired as well. That includes the head of the Office of Information Policy, which is responsible for transparency within the department, the head of the Ethics Office, which has a very basic, important function of ensuring that we don't have conflicts of interest or improper influence of money in the department, the head of the Office of Professional Responsibility. So these sort of systematic guardrails have been dismantled intentionally to pave the way for the politicization of the department. And then Donald Trump started installing people who have no relevant qualifications into key prosecutorial positions. The only qualification that they have that's relevant to him is loyalty to him. And that has been happening throughout the U.S. attorney's offices. The U.S. attorneys are the chief federal prosecutors representing different districts. And in many districts, Trump is using a workaround from the legal system for appointing U.S. attorneys to install political loyalists who have absolutely no qualifications, who couldn't get confirmation from the Senate, which is what should be happening, but they're loyal to him and they'll do his bidding and they'll prosecute his political enemies. So this weekend, we saw all of that come together. All of these things Trump has been doing for months in the department, in that tweet that he blasted out, calling on Pam Bondi to prosecute his political enemies. And we saw that he fired a longstanding career employee of the department who was the prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia because he wouldn't file these charges against Adam Schiff and James Comey and Letitia James because there was no factual basis. And he fired that person and he installed somebody who's an insurance lawyer. Her name is Lindsay Halligan. Her background is in insurance law. Most recently, she worked in the White House as an assistant to Trump, responsible for removing what he calls improper ideology from the Smithsonian museums. She has no
True.
prosecuting experience, but if anybody's going to bring these cases against Adam Schiff and others, it's going to be her.
So I'm wondering if Trump has been aided by some misconceptions that perhaps people have. We know that presidents, pick their department heads for Health and Human Services and for the EPA and on and on. Um, but even though you appoint the attorney general, historically, the attorney general has always acted independently. I mean, we've heard President Biden grumble that he had wished that Merrick Garland had made different decisions, especially with prosecuting Donald Trump. But his office was independent, and that was his decision as attorney general. But I wonder if Trump has benefited a bit from maybe a misconception that people have that, oh, it's always been this way. You always have a loyalist who is going to do your bidding, and maybe he's taking it a little bit further, but it's not, as you've said, a five-alarm fire.
It really is unprecedented. Trump is trying to spin a narrative saying that the Justice Department was politicized before he got there, and what he is doing is just the same as all of his predecessors, but it absolutely isn't. I mean, the closest that we could get to what Donald Trump is doing is what Richard Nixon did, and as we know, he was impeached and removed from office. He resigned in disgrace. He is somebody who could have been criminally prosecuted himself if he wasn't pardoned by his successor in office. So no one since Nixon has done anything even approaching what Donald Trump is doing now with the Justice Department, and he is making it explicit, which is something that's new. I mean, what really happened this weekend that was so shocking is that he put it all out into the public domain that he expects his attorney general to prosecute the people that he doesn't like, regardless of whether the evidence and the facts and law support that prosecution. The guiding principle of the Justice Department has always been that you follow the facts and you follow the law. You do not initiate prosecutions for political reasons. Prosecutions have to be based on fact and law. But under Donald Trump's regime, that's not the way he sees it. That's not how he wants to do it. And that is incredibly dangerous. And it's very, very different from what any of his predecessors have done.
But this is very similar to what other authoritarians have done throughout history and currently. One of the routine plays in the playbook is to accuse your enemies of corruption, and oftentimes that might disqualify them from appearing on the ballot against you, and could land them in jail, so they obviously can't run. Um, what what would you say an apt comparison to what Donald Trump is doing here would be?
I struggle to even identify a time in history when we've seen anything like this happen. It's just really
But in
chilling
other
what.
countries, really, because
Oh,
it's
sure.
not the democratic tradition, but, like, Viktor Orban or, throughout history, we've seen this, in other countries, which is frightening that that's where we're at.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we take for granted the idea that prosecutions have to be public, that you can't be just kidnapped off the street and thrown in jail. We've always taken that for granted in the United States, but that's the direction that we are moving, that you can be prosecuted based on where your political loyalties lie or based on disagreement with the president, which is very much the stuff of an authoritarian, undemocratic state. It's not what we expect here in the United States. And I think that one of the reasons why this has been happening so fast is that we Americans, including those of us who are knowledgeable in the law, took a lot of things for granted about how our system is supposed to work. And we assumed that our leaders would be operating in good faith. We assumed that even though our justice system is imperfect, that everyone who has a stake in it is trying in good faith to make it work fairly. That is no longer happening. We're no longer seeing leadership trying to make the justice system work fairly for everyone. They are openly embracing, Donald Trump is openly embracing the idea that a two-tier justice system is okay, that it is okay to use it to punish enemies and to reward friends. That is something that, there's always been a perception that the criminal justice system treats poor people unfair, people of color unfairly. And as a public defender, I've seen that firsthand. It does. It's true. But we've always been striving for better. We've been trying to make it better. Donald Trump seems to be perfectly comfortable with the idea that it's not an equal system of justice and that he can use it to exact vengeance on his enemies and he can use it to dole out favors to his friends by dismissing charges against people that he likes or rewarding them with pardons. So it really is just a totally new and different approach to our whole system that nobody saw coming. Nobody was really prepared to respond to because it's just so fundamentally at odds with how we've done it for decades.
And Donald Trump is someone who has made a whole bunch of history. I mean, he is the first president who has ever been impeached twice. Um, Before he was reelected, he was facing upward of about 90 criminal charges and for several different cases, including the documents that were found at Mar-a-Lago of sensitive national security issues. Also, his actions that led to the January 6th riots. And of course, totally separately, he had the case with E. Jean Carroll for sexual assault, and he was actually found criminally liable in that case. So he's no stranger to the justice system himself. But of course, the Supreme Court did rule last year that he was essentially immune from all sorts of prosecution. So that seems to be a backdrop to all of this, where he has been accused of extremely serious crimes, most of which were never actually prosecuted. And now that we have him going after his political enemies and really muddying the waters, so that people, do you think it's an effort to show people the whole system's corrupt? They went after me for politics. That's just the way it works. I didn't do anything wrong. And, now that I'm president, I get to do what I want and I can go after my enemies.
I don't think that he's really trying to send a larger message about the justice system. I think he's just a hypocrite, frankly. um,
That's
I
totally fair.
I
Yeah.
think he's just looking out for his own self interest in the way he's using the justice system. And I think it's plain to everyone what the differences are between his uses of the justice system and his predecessors. There are always going to be cases in every administration that feel political to the other side or feel unfair. That's not uncommon, but the idea that the whole system of justice has been politicized in the past is just has no basis in fact. And I don't think Donald Trump cares too much about facts. He just cares about winning, and he sees the Justice Department as an important tool for him to win revenge against people he perceives as his enemies at all costs.
Well, we did have a, really another interesting story that broke over the weekend, and that involves his head of ICE, Tom Homan, where he was actually caught literally taking a bag of cash like something out of a movie, and it was $50,000 as a bribe, and we found that, this was before he was appointed, this was last fall, and the charges were never filed, again, with political pressure, and the reaction of, like, the right-wing media has been, "Just leave Tom alone, he's doing great work, it does not matter." How do we get to the point where something like this can't matter? I mean, this is just
Yeah.
the textbook definition of corruption.
It is, yeah. So there are a couple of things about this. One is this is an illustration of the punishment and rewards system of justice. So, as a reward to Tom Homan for doing what he's doing on the immigration front, Trump's Justice Department decided to discontinue this investigation against him. He's going to face no consequences for accepting literally a bag of cash. That's sort of the flip side of the revenge against enemies. It's revenge against enemies and favors for friends.
It's
But the
really a
other
mob mentality.
It yes, very much so, and it involves the selective enforcement of laws in a way that is just fundamentally contrary to how our system is supposed to work. But the other piece of this that is shocking is that Tom Homan got this job in the first place. The fact that he is somebody who was installed into this position when it was known, it was in government files that he had been investigated for accepting this bag full of cash. So even if they decided not to prosecute him, they certainly should not have put him in this high level position of trust. He's in a position of trust with the American people, and he's proven that he's not someone who is trustworthy. This type of self dealing, the idea that you would promise government contracts once you get into office in exchange for cash, is the definition of corruption, as you said. And in his particular role, he has tremendous power to award extremely lucrative contracts to people who want to run immigration detention facilities and do other things involved with deportations, which is very costly. So the government spends a lot of money on it. And the idea that somebody is making decisions about how to spend that money who has shown themselves to be willing to pocket kickbacks is just it's just not it's not a reasonable way to monitor the use of taxpayer funds. So the prosecution side of it is one thing, and then just like the public trust that he has been given despite that corruption is just shocking on a separate level.
We've also had Trump, make some, a slew of executive orders, one of which he says he is designating Antifa as a terrorist group, and he wants to exercise wide powers to go after them. What does this mean in terms of our justice system? Because first of all, there is no organized Antifa group, but if the president is able to basically determine, oh, I believe you're Antifa, and therefore we have the power to go after you. Where does that leave just everyday citizens who might, show up at a protest and then be designated like enemies of the state?
Yeah, I mean, that designation of Antifa as a terrorist organization is a big step toward criminalizing free speech. So you're absolutely right. It's a totally amorphous idea, like who is a member of Antifa, and the idea that the president or the Justice Department is seeking to identify people that they can put into that category so that they can potentially treat them as terrorists should be very alarming to all Americans. We don't know what that designation could potentially be based on, but Trump has certainly shown in his attitude toward the media that he believes that people who criticize him should be punished, that they should be taken off the air, that they should face consequences. So there's no reason to believe that he wouldn't see it differently in this context. It's possible that he will go after people who have just simply been critical of him. And does that lead to him going after people who didn't vote for him possibly? I mean, is that could that be the next step? I don't know where this ends. There's no clear end in sight to it, and it's very scary and should be very scary for all of us, and not just those of us who are criticizing Trump, but those of us who want the right to speak freely our views about any political candidate or politician or any issue of importance. This is not a right versus left issue. It's an issue about basic free speech rights in our democracy.
We also saw after the tragic death of Charlie Kirk, people like JD Vance, the vice president, were talking about how this is not a time for unity and we have to go after our enemies on the left. When we start having the White House designate that half the country is, their political enemies, and they're willing to, overstep and exercise such sweeping powers. We really don't know where it ends. But I'm wondering, what do we do as everyday citizens? Because, the First Amendment is something that I think a lot of us do take for granted. I mean, obviously, I'm a journalist, and so it's something that I think a lot about, but just in general, we think that we all have the freedom to protest and to say what we want, and not to have the president decide who we should watch on late night television. So what do we do here before we get to the point where um, suddenly we have a president who is really shredding the Constitution?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is that we not censor ourselves in advance. I think there are a lot of people, and by people I really mean corporations, large organizations. I don't mean individual people. I mean, there are a lot of entities that are censoring themselves in advance because they don't want to get crosswise with the president. And that is essentially capitulating to a bully. That is not helpful. That is what has made it possible for Trump to amass so much power so quickly. People are just folding and giving way to him. We need to not censor ourselves in advance because we fear retribution. We need to be brave and we need to continue speaking our minds. And we need to stand up for those who are doing that publicly and in ways that make them vulnerable. In my own situation, one of the things that has been really challenging is I spoke up about the reasons for my firing from the Justice Department, and I faced retaliation from the leadership of the department for doing that. And there were many people who rallied to my support. But, there are also people who in the department that are defending what the department has done to me. They're doing it in court, they're doing it in litigation because they just want to keep their own jobs. They want to stay safe. And I understand that. But this is not the time to do that. This is the time to speak up and stand up for what's right and not capitulate in advance because it's safer for you personally. We are headed down a very dangerous path, and we need to band together to support each other and to stay vocal and loud and stand up for our beliefs and our values, even when it's hard.
In that case, in particular, that I know you were fired over, that involved pressure that you were under to restore actor Mel Gibson's gun rights after he um, had a history of violence, domestic violence, and under the law, it was very clear that he should not have his gun rights. But again, he is friendly with the president, and
Yeah.
so this was another reward for one
Yep.
of his friends. When you took that step, did you think that your job was probably on the line for it?
I knew it was a real possibility. I actually, messaged my deputy just hours before I was fired saying, "Is Mel Gibson going to be my downfall?" And he was, but it was worth it because that was the right thing to do. I mean, I my integrity is intact after that, and the fact that I lost my job is unfortunate, but it would be even more unfortunate if, I were the one who had given Mel Gibson his guns back. Um, I think this is just a time where we have to make hard decisions, and the decisions are ones that we're going to have to live with for a long time. My view of it is once you compromise your integrity, you cannot get it back. So you better be really sure that you want to do that. And I think that a lot of institutions are struggling with that choice, and a lot of our larger institutions are making wrong choices in that regard. But I think that we, the citizens, are learning. We learned through, the boycotts of ABC and the outcry over Jimmy Kimmel's firing that when we stand up collectively for what's right, and when we show support to those who are being canceled or banned or punished, that we can have a real effect just through the power of our collective citizenship. So I think we need to persist in those efforts, and I think we really need to stand behind and support those who are facing difficult consequences, who are the subjects of retaliation by this administration. We need to not censor ourselves in advance. We need to continue to persist in standing up for what's right, even when it's costly and scary and hard.
And you were actually fired by Todd Blanche, correct?
Yes.
And
Yes,
and
by
Todd
memo. Not in person, via
not in
memo.
person. Okay. And of course Todd Blanche was in the headlines several weeks ago because he was the one who met with Ghislaine Maxwell, who is Epstein's collaborator. And had been convicted on sex trafficking charges and has since been moved to a minimum security prison in Texas. All the while, we have not had the Epstein files released, and victims weren't even consulted about this. Can you talk to us a little bit? I know you did the last time you were on, but I mean, again, that's another big break with precedent for this administration for the DOJ.
Yeah, the idea that the number 2 official in the Justice Department is going to a prison to meet with someone who has been convicted of sexually exploiting children is really shocking. This is not something that could have happened under any other administration. It would have been unfathomable just a year ago that a deputy attorney general would do that. This is someone the Justice Department has previously said is not credible, is not trustworthy or truthful. This is someone
She
who's
was
serving.
convicted of perjury twice, correct?
She, was found to have perjured herself in a deposition, I believe, and she was convicted and sentenced, to 20 years in the sex trafficking case in prison. So this is somebody who committed, crimes of the most serious nature, and she's getting special treatment straight from the top. Donald Trump's personal lawyer is on a personal mission for Donald Trump to try to problem solve for him. The Epstein situation has become a huge political liability for Trump. It's sort of an Achilles heel of his presidency. So he sent his most trusted person, Todd Blanche, down there to try to solve this problem for him by meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell. And the idea that the Justice Department did this without consultation of the victims is really just, it defies not only norms and principles, but also the law. There are laws in place that require consultation with victims. There are Department of Justice policies that require it. So the fact that the deputy AG did this on his own without engaging victims is really, it's just it shocks the conscience.
It does. It's just horrific. I've talked with one survivor of Jeffrey Epstein, Jess Michaels, and it's incredibly traumatizing for
Yeah,
these women um, to find that once again their voices aren't being listened to at
yeah,
all. Um, and to me, it's symbolic of just the approach in general that this Department of Justice under Trump takes is that they're willing to bend over backwards for friends of Donald Trump, very powerful people, but it goes against the core mission, which is, they're supposed to be prosecuting crimes of great importance and protecting victims. And
Yeah.
that's not something that I'm seeing coming out of that office.
Not at all. Not at all. There's been a lot of discussion about whether Ghislaine Maxwell might receive a pardon from Donald Trump. And just the fact that we're having a conversation about that is pretty shocking. And it's reinforced by things that are happening elsewhere in the department in other contexts. For example, the department canceled a huge amount of grant funding to causes related to survivors of domestic violence, money that was supposed to support survivors of domestic violence. Grants were just canceled without any notice, which suggests it's an indicator of the value that the department places on victims of sexual abuse. It's not much. And the pardon attorney, Ed Martin, my successor, the person who literally sits in my old office, just recently posted a picture of himself on X with Russell Brand, who's somebody who is accused of rape. He is being prosecuted in the UK for rape. Now, I don't know if Russell Brand is worried about being charged in the United States as well, but the fact that he's cozying up with the US pardon attorney, while there's also discussions about the possibility of Ghislaine Maxwell being pardoned, suggests that there really is not an aversion to associating with people who may be sex offenders. There is a willingness to consider forgiving them through official channels for their crimes. It really was just pretty disturbing to see that photo that he posted without any sort of self-awareness around what does it look like? What message does it send if the US pardon attorney is posing for a picture with somebody who is being prosecuted for rape?
So Trump has perhaps inadvertently exposed some of the weaknesses of our legal system, of our Constitution, by pushing the boundaries. And uh, he has shown that, especially during his second term in office, that the guardrails are really not there to stop him. So how would we go about rebuilding our legal system, in the future, in a post-Trump future, to ensure that no one is able to exploit this system again, for self-dealing and corruption, and to twist the mission of the Department of Justice the way that he is doing?
One thing that is reassuring to me is that a lot of people who are longtime DOJ experts who are no longer in the department are already working on the after action report, sort of the how did we get here, what guardrails failed, how did they fail so quickly, and how can we build it back stronger in the future. I came into the Department of Justice having spent 10 years as a public defender. So I came in the door with my fair share of criticisms of the department and things that I think could have been done better and differently. And I know others are now thinking about that in the context of what has gone wrong in this administration. And I am confident that there are a lot of people who are going to be very motivated and engaged in building back the Justice Department stronger once we get through this nightmare that we are in. But we just need to hold strong and make sure that the damage doesn't get to the point that we can't repair it when this is over.
Well, Liz, I so appreciate your personal bravery in standing up, because it's people like you who can shine a light onto what has been happening on the inside. And we also appreciate just your vast legal expertise, because there are so many issues that we're all following right now, and it's helpful to have someone like you be able to break them down and to let us know, perhaps, uh, how things might improve down the line.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have the opportunity to talk with you, Susan, and please have me back on anytime.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon.